Welcome to Transform Session 3, Option 1. This is the first of 3 videos that we're going to have about standards, alignment, and thinking about what your students are learning. I'm Kendra.
And I'm Lacey.
We're going to get started with a quick video that one of our colleagues recorded for us.
Yeah, so this video was recorded by Summer Pettigrew. She is a former 5th grade teacher. She used iPads in her classroom, and she is one of the most fabulous coaches on our team. And we asked her to record this story because it's a great and short illustration of what we're going to be talking about today.
A couple of summers ago, I was working with a group of teachers in an iPad integration class where they were to take an existing lesson plan that they had taught and look for ways to integrate technology into that lesson plan so that it enhanced the learning for the students. The final project for the class was for the teachers to create a lesson plan, and in that lesson plan there was to be some sort of final product where the students showed that they learned the content. So this particular teacher that I recall working with had a great unit in science that she wanted to focus on, specifically weather. And within that lesson, she had the students doing a couple of things on the iPads to where they would look at pictures of clouds and draw those clouds in their notebook and label them and sort of have ways to describe clouds. But one particular part of that standard was for students to understand how wind affected things, how wind caused things to move. And so the teacher created for her final project a lesson activity where students would cut, paste, and put together a pinwheel and then take that pinwheel outside and watch the wind blow it. And while I know that creates a useful tool for the students to see the effects of wind, I don't know that it necessarily was the best way to cover that standard, specifically because it took the students a good 30 to 40 minutes just to cut everything out and get it pasted down and glued together and worked right. And the teacher had to go around and really support those students in getting the things cut out and put together. Nor does the pinwheel building itself address any sort of standard. So when thinking about the final product, we sort of realized that the students were doing a lot of this physical activity of cutting, pasting, and gluing, but not necessarily proving that they understood how wind made it move. So it was something to sort of reevaluate for that teacher.
So this was an easy to understand, relatable example of why it's important to have an awareness of what the standards are asking you to do and pay attention to something that we're going to call standards alignment. And as a caveat to our lesson today, we're going to be talking about the word standards. And Kendra and we're teachers at heart, so we just want to take a minute to say we use the term standards a lot because it's what comes naturally to us, but we are speaking about standards or learning objectives or IEP goals or behavior goals or classroom goals or whatever it is that you want the students to be learning. So forgive us in advance if we say standards.
And feel free to use those terms interchangeably in your head, whatever you use to dictate what your students are going to be learning. That's what we're trying to say. So we're going to start by looking at a standard and then looking at what your kids are doing in the class. And we're trying to get you to be able to see if those two fit together or if there's alignment there. So is the activity or the learning that your kids are doing in class aligned to what the standard or what your learning goal says they should be doing?
That was really good. That was a fabulous way of saying that. So let's take them into the meat of this. And we're going to start out with a little bit of history because history is our secret passion.
We love history.
Bloom's. Benjamin Bloom, he was a cognitive psychologist at the University of Chicago and built this Bloom's taxonomy in 1956. So if you think about it, most of us were either not born or
very young.
Very, very young when this came about and became something that teachers started doing. It was written to help educators understand the ways in which students can acquire knowledge and develop new knowledge, skills, and understandings. And I guess basically it classifies different levels of human cognition. So it takes a close look at how kids are thinking about the things that we're asking them to think about. Our standards are written using this Bloom's vocabulary, but as a point of interest, in 2001, one of Bloom's very own students named Lauren Anderson said, hey, this isn't good, I'm going to make it better, and decided to create a revised Bloom's taxonomy, which is why if you do Google searches For Bloom's taxonomy, you'll get two totally different sets of words because there's an old version and a new version. So our suggestion is, if you are going to be searching for Bloom's taxonomy, that you just search for revised Bloom's taxonomy to get the most updated version.
That's some great info. I never knew any of that stuff about Benjamin Bloom. And even though this is the revised one, if you are used to the older version, you might still recognize some of the words and some of the actions that are on here. We're going to go through real fast and talk about it a little bit at each level. So starting at the bottom, this is the remembering level. This is where students are able to recall and regurgitate facts. So this is like rote knowledge, understanding the basics about what they're learning. So knowing who, what, when, where, why.
Yeah, and then the next level is understanding, being able to take that regurgitated fact memorization and have some basic understanding of those facts. So we don't often have a lot of math examples. In math, we might ask a student to write a number out in standard form, demonstrating that not only do they understand what standard form is, but they can regurgitate those basic facts, vocabulary, numbers, and such.
The next level is application, and this is where we're asking, can students solve problems in new situations based on what they know about a topic? So using that remembering and that understanding level information, and then applying that to a new situation. So can they make a plan? Can they construct something? Or in math, you might ask them, how many would you need to do something? So taking the skills that they learned from something else and applying it to a new scenario.
Yep. And the next one is analysis, to examine something in detail. So you're examining and breaking down information into smaller parts by identifying motives and causes, or making inferences and finding evidence to support your ideas. Students here might differentiate between somebody's facts and opinions. They might compare and contrast characters in a novel or an event in history. And if you're in math, you might ask your students to complete a pattern, knowing that they have to analyze the numbers that are in that pattern before they can complete it. So that'd be a good math example.
The next level is evaluating, and at the evaluating level, we're asking students to present and defend opinions by making judgments about information, validity of ideas, or quality of work based on a set of criteria. So this is the kind of thing where we're asking them to judge whether a character should have acted in a certain way, or asking them which set is correct in math, and then having them defend their ideas.
All right, which takes us to the creating level. This is the highest of all of the levels. And when students are asked to create, we are wanting them to assemble elements and make a whole new product, a whole new idea, or a whole new point of view. And I want to point out one thing about how this image on your screen looks. Normally, when you find information about Bloom's taxonomy, you get a triangle, and it kind of alludes to the fact that basic is on the bottom. That's not the thing that we want the kids to do. We want the kids to be all the way at the top of the little triangle or whatever. But I like this image because the illustration is slightly different. It is pointing out the fact that if you are going to create something, that as a learner, as somebody who's thinking about something, you also have to probably be able to analyze that thing, and you have to apply the information to new situations. But most importantly, you need to have some background knowledge and some understanding and be able to just recall and regurgitate the basic facts before you can create anything. So I like that about this visual, that it shows that you can't just jump straight into creation, that there is some pre-learning that needs to go into that.
That's absolutely true. And if we're continuing with our math example, it's like if your students can't add, they probably can't do trigonometry. So those lower levels, that remembering and understanding and applying, really is important when you're trying to get your kids to upper levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And that leads us back to our standards. So when you're looking at your standards, you should know what the level of Bloom's taxonomy is that's important or that's highlighted within that standard. And that's going to take us to 3 examples that we have for you.
All right, so real quickly, first we have this kindergarten math standard. It's from the data and measurement and data analysis strand. And then here, we're only asking the kids to do something very simple. So if you take a close look, you'll see that what we want the kids to do is identify, which means that we only want them to maybe label things on a picture. We only want them to list. We want them to match. We want them to name, or we want them to select. And we are not asking the kids to create something new, to measure anything. We're not asking them to compare. And most importantly, especially for us math teachers, is that we're not asking kids to solve any problems. the students, for this example, when it says identify measurable attributes of an object, we're not asking them to add them all together or solve any problems with them. Just know what they are, know where they are, know how to find them. So we wanted to show this very easy example to keep that in mind.
Our next one is a 6th grade ELA standard. So it's focused on reading and literacy text. When you're looking at this, clearly it's a little more intense than the kindergarten one was, but can you pick out a couple of the Bloom's action words that we've been talking about? There are 3 sets of them. The first is analyze, then provide evidence, and finally explain. So those are the things that we're asking our students to do with this standard. So if this were my standard, I would think about, what does analyze mean? How might students provide evidence? And what does it mean when students explain something? So are they having to create things? Are they having to make judgments about things? We really want to keep them at the standard that we want them to have reflected from our standards that we're
you're totally right about that, Kendra. In addition, so let's think opposite about this. If your kids are being asked to analyze something, just make a note that they probably need some background knowledge, and they probably need those lower levels before they can do any analysis of author's choice, point of view, perspective, purpose, shape, content, meaning, and style.
Yeah.
All right, so this standard, like I mentioned previously, Kendra and I are slightly history nerds, maybe. I don't know. I know I am.
No, maybe about it.
Yeah, we love the history stuff, but we didn't pull this because it was an amazingly interesting standard. We pulled this high school U.S. history standard to demonstrate a few things. First, look how overwhelming this is.
There are so many words.
I mean, looking through the English standards alone, that was overwhelming for me, not having an English background, but I only pulled one sentence out of the English standards. There were pages and pages and pages of them, and this is just one U.S. history standard. And part of what I want to show and, I guess, celebrate the history teachers on, and also just point out to all the other teachers, is that not only are you guys experts in all the words that come between the verbs, y'all are experts on the British political system and rule of law, and experts on the Philadelphia Convention, but we want to just take the time to say, if you can find the Bloom's word and make sure that your activities and lessons match what the Bloom's word is, then you don't have to spend extra time on this project or whatever it is you're doing with the sentence. That for this particular class, students only need to be able to summarize, analyze, and explain. And these are, in fact, pretty low-level Bloom's words. So they're not having to, for example, create their own utopian societies. They're not going to have to do any of this. That was the point. We just want you guys to be able to see, as overwhelming and as long as the standard is, these are the basic things that the kids need to do with it.
And it's the same in any subject area. So if we're talking about the periodic table of elements in science, or we're talking about author's choice in ELA, we're not focusing on content with this screencast. We're really talking about alignment. So we're going to be talking about Bloom's. We're going to be talking about how your standard influences the work that's going on in your classroom.
So let's just talk very quickly about this chart. We did a Google search for the new Bloom's taxonomy. We found this analyzing knowledge. So let's refer back, just in your minds, back to that long history standard where it was asking students to analyze things. Part of what we're going to ask you guys to do as your task for video 1 is to take a critical look at one of your upcoming standards and come up with some ideas of things that kids can do to analyze, or to
identify,
or to create, or whatever it is that your standard actually says. And this was a helpful chart for us because I can see on here that there are tons of activities and ideas listed in ways that students can show that they can analyze something. So we're going to link this into the website so that you guys have access to it. But just keep that in mind. The task that we're about to ask you to do is pretty simple. Just be good Google searchers. Anything else you want to say about this analyzing knowledge thing?
I think it leads into our second point on this, that you will have some students, especially if you're pre-testing and you see what your kids know, that are already beyond the standard level. So if you're asking kids to identify things and they can already do that, definitely go beyond. Have kids create, have them justify. Like Lacey was talking about, have them build their own 18th century utopian society where they're their own very special dictator. But know that that's not the intention of the standard at that history level. So for those kids that need to go beyond, definitely push them beyond. And if you have the time and the energy and the materials, have your whole class go beyond if you can. But know that there is a level at the written into the standard where the kids need to be, and that's really what we need to focus on them being able to accomplish.
So let's just bring this back to the pinwheel story at the beginning. If you have a pinwheel project in your classroom, something that you love to do that doesn't necessarily match the standard, do it. Take a look at what you're doing in your class. Make sure that your activities can match the standard, the level of blooms that it's supposed to. Make sure that you have the extra time in order to do your pinwheel project. But if it's that one project that you love, that you cannot wait to get to, that totally engages your kids, absolutely do your pinwheel project. Go have a donut party. Build your 18th century utopian society. Just make sure that your kids are doing the level of blooms that they're supposed to be doing. Wouldn't you agree?
I would. And I think there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of those pinwheel parties and donuts and stuff. You're showing the love of learning and lifelong learning. That's a really valuable lesson, I think, for kids to have.
Yeah, so you guys just pinwheel away.
Pinwheel it up.
Pinwheel with some thought about why you're pinwheeling.
Pinwheel with purpose.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Hashtag pinwheel with purpose.
Boom.
Okay, so what you're seeing right now is an example of your task. And like I said, before Kendra explains what's about to happen, this is all linked to the website. So we're just going to give you a little verbal demonstration, explanation of this example.
So our first task in session 3, option 1, is that you are going to do what we just did on this example slide. So we want you to grab one of the standards that you have upcoming between now and the end of the year, and we want you to draw attention to the blooms words like we've been talking about. So in the standard that Lacey and I chose, obviously it's a history one, the blooms word was summarized. So we changed the font and changed the color. You can draw attention to yours however you want to. Draw a box around it, highlight it with the highlight tool, however you want to do it.
Yeah, and that font looks suspiciously like the South Carolina Department of Education standards font with the rest of those words there.
It's probably copied and pasted.
All right, so exactly. Everybody who's listening to this, copy and paste that standard into the top box on a new slide in the link on the presentation. Start over.
That's okay. I can box that out.
Okay.
Once you've copied and pasted your slide in and drawn attention to the blooms word or words, you're going to go down to the green box, and then you're going to brainstorm 3 to 5 things that you could have kids do. So Lacey and I read through the standard, and then we thought about what we might have kids do if we were teaching this standard. You're going to do the same thing.
Yeah, so all 3 of these activities are some kind of summarization activities that the kids could do in order to prove that they know what they're talking about, right?
Definitely.
But that's not it. There's one more task. Well, 2 more tasks.
2 more tasks.
See that pretty little box in the right-hand corner is a color coding box. And the first thing we're going to ask you to do is color code your slide. So our slide is black because it's an example slide, but we want you guys to right-click on the slide, select background, and change the color to match so that all of the English slides will be gray, all of the green slides will be history, all of the blue slides will be math. And it's not because we want this project to be pretty. There's an actual purpose. So Kendra, what's the purpose?
Well, that takes us to the next step, the purple box on here in the lower right. So once you've done your standard, you've brainstormed some of the activities you can have kids do, and you've color-coded it, we're asking you to find someone else's standard. And if you go first, you might have to come back to this, but find someone else's standard and then give them some feedback. So what's something that the creator didn't think about? Maybe it's another activity you can think of. Maybe it's something, a roadblock they might run into. Some kind of feedback that you can give them.
Yeah, or some ideas. So we only asked you guys to put 3 to 5 things, but go ahead and help them out and add some more. Let's make this task collaborative. We're hoping that if you're a math teacher, that you can search through all the blue slides and you might find things that will be helpful in your own classroom. And since you're the math expert, you might be able to help people who are having trouble with this.
Definitely. And if you're having trouble getting started, feel free to use the work that other people have done to get you going or to use as a brainstorm. We want this to be a positive relatively not painful thing to do.
All right, so then the last thing before we wrap this up is this little project that we're asking you to do, this little task is not going away. We're going to be readdressing this and coming back to your slide in section 2 or video 2 of this task. Thank you.
Option.
All right, so that's it for now. If you have any questions, reach out to your coach or check for information on the website. We've got everything that you would need right there.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you with the second screencast whenever you're finished.
Yeah, probably a few minutes.
Bye.
Bye.